So in 2005-2006, the university decided that a certain slice of the information that we collected privately could be exposed publicly, so long as we could actually explicitly work out what the policy was between the private and the public layer. So what we were able to do was we were able to automatically produce a web page for every single academic in the university that listed their publications, their grants, their research classifications, their contact details. And all that information that was going on there was not an exceptions-driven process. It was actually driven by policy from information that mostly we already had in our administrative systems. So the end output, it was just a fancy report. Basically, I was a bit more of that story. Because we had enough of that information already there, we were able to provide a self-service interface for researchers just to give us that extra little bit that we didn't have. So researchers were able to add to that record a bit of a biography and a picture of themselves. So the awards and qualifications, originally coming from HR, now become a public record in a similar way to the way that qualifications were once exposed in the university calendar. Research expertise and international linkages. This was another thing that sort of, because we had enough information all in one spot, we had people in the media office and international office saying, we really want to know what people's international linkages are and research expertise. So because we had that information there and that critical mass of information, we were able to add these things and record that sort of information. Grants and contracts, publications, and actually something interesting with the publications that we were able to do, you'll see a source-it link down there. Because the publications that information that we collect is for government reporting, and we actually have to do a pretty good job of getting that information correct, we can actually construct open URL links to actually try and source the material. So that's what we did, and in many cases it works. That's actually the other thing we're able to do was actually provide links from our publications data collected for the purposes of government reporting, and actually link that data to the articles and e-prints. And the other thing, story I was telling you, was that we're able to use that high quality metadata to structure open URL searches. I thought I had a picture of that, but I've obviously copied the wrong picture. The other thing that we had, and it's somewhat like the collection of subject headings that Tom was talking about, for every item of record that goes in a publication or a grant and contract, researchers or research administrators had to classify those objects in terms of government reporting classifications. So we were able to aggregate that information and say, Professor Cooney has produced work under these classifications, and if you followed those URLs, you'd find, for instance, you'd find a list of all of the other current academics in the university who'd ever classified their work as industrial relations, for instance. Obviously, the University of Melbourne isn't alone in this initiative, and this is a good thing. Because all Australian universities actually have quite high government reporting exercises, other universities have been able to do the same thing. One really important example of this is UQ Researchers. It's really important for two reasons. The first reason is that the University of Queensland doesn't have a one database to rule them all type approach to its administrative systems. It has a separate HR system, a separate research system. But nonetheless, it's been able to pull that information together to build a consolidated picture, which is quite an empowering message that you can do that. The other thing is that they've actually tried to tackle research projects and research groups, which is something that we haven't until recently needed to communicate to government reporting. So being able to try and do that centrally is quite impressive. Over in the US, there's an extraordinary example of trying to do the same thing, and that's the Cornell University's VIVO initiative. And the reason why it's extraordinary is that American universities don't have these overarching government reporting requirements to report back publications and grants. So what VIVO did, which is based in Manlib Library, is actually said, well, you've got this information in faculties across the place. We'll actually build an aggregation service that will take information from various different faculties and aggregate it together, and it's using an RDF triple store to do this, to build up statements of identity about researchers and research groups. So that's a really striking example of the same sort of philosophy. And another one that I stumbled across the other day, Expertise Ireland, they actually do this at the national level. So they've got one place where you can go and find out about the expertise of any individual researcher in Ireland, and you can see it's very similar. You can see contact details, publications, professional associations, consultancy history and research projects, and that's from information that's being fed up from all the different universities in Ireland. So we've gone from facts to identity, and I think it's not just, I think it's really important to recognise that it's not just representing information that was already there. We're actually doing something that's quite creative. We're actually creating authoritative statements of identity. And it's important to realise that, because with that realisation comes a responsibility. If we're actually collecting all of that information, say from our faculty systems and representing it all together, we have a responsibility to make sure that we've got systems in place to correct that information, because we don't really want to be telling a story about an academic that's wrong when we can fix it. So one of the normative things that initiatives like Find an Expert do at a university level is, by exposing information that was once private and is now public, it actually puts an enormous pressure on that information to get that information correct, which is a good thing, but you also need to put the systems in place to make sure that that happens. There are some other hairier examples around this. The name that we're representing in Find an Expert is coming from the HR system, and it's the legal name of a person. It may not be the name that they publish by or the name that they want to be known by in their research community, and there's some of the things that we're starting to have to become aware of when we're actually creating these identities, that through aggregating these identities we need to actually be sensitive to the way it's presented, and actually by doing it introduce new processes that actually address those problems. So the examples I've shown you so far are actually coming from, I guess, for want of a better word, the HR tradition of actually knowing who you've got at a university and being able to aggregate data against that sort of identity. It is, of course, it's not just universities creating statements of identity about their researchers by aggregating information that they already had. WorldCat Identities Project is a terrific example of this. Gavin McCarthy is my boss, and I think this is an extraordinary example of what you can actually derive from the record. Gavin McCarthy is primarily an archivist extraordinaire, but he's also a musician in a band called Jugularity. And it's really nice that WorldCat Identities actually knows that fact about him, and that he's a performer, because he is, but you wouldn't necessarily know that from his professional history. Obviously, People Australia is another example of being able to start aggregating statements of fact about people and creating stories about people from those facts that are more than just the facts that you're aggregating. I should say, Tom, that Gavin's very happy with his WorldCat identity, and now in the bottom of his email he actually has his WorldCat identity unique identifier. So do I. So there's two worlds there. There's worlds that are creating statements of identity basically from a name authority tradition, and there's another world that's creating statements of aggregated identity from a more sort of HR personnel tradition. What if we could merge those two worlds? What if we could harvest current university expressions of identity into a national record?